Hi, my name is Michael Sahno. I'm Jewish and I love Israel. So if you love Israel, if you love being Jewish, or if you have an unwavering connection to the land of Israel, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the 12 Cities in Israel podcast. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Hey, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? My name is Michael Sahno, and welcome to the 12 Cities in Israel podcast, the only positive podcast about the people, the food, the culture, and the history of the state of Israel. Hey, listen, if this is your first time watching, don't forget to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and the notification bell. Make sure you share this podcast with your friends and your families. It's a ton of fun to make, and we enjoy bringing it to you. Also, if you want to take us with you, you can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and on Spotify. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by the 12 Cities in Israel Modern Hebrew Flashcards, the best way to learn Hebrew, the best way to brush up on Hebrew. You can find them on Amazon for Kindle, and if you don't have a Kindle, that's all right, because you can download the app for Android, iPhone, iPad, PC, and for Mac. This episode is also brought to you by VV Backdrops. Boom! In the background, you can see it. They did this for us. The 12 Cities in Israel Modern Hebrew Flashcards and the link for VV Backdrops can both be found below in the description, so check it out. And without further ado, welcome to the show. All right, hey, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you guys here. With us today is an amazing friend, and I'm going to give you all the information into how this person became my friend. But today, to talk about Israel in America, is the one, the only, CHARLOTTE Strauss. CHARLOTTE, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hey, what's going on?
Nothing much, We already went through the whole introduction, so it feels weird to do the introduction again.
I know, but I have to. All right, what a lot of people don't know is I have to prep people for the show, and normally it's face to face, so it's not that big a deal. But in the COVID environment, it's had to be done over Zoom, and these interviews are being done over Zoom. So sometimes it's the first time, and it's the first time you and I have face to face in a couple of months now, right?
Totally.
So there you have it. All right, so we're here. You're here. You are to talk about Israel in America, to talk about different communities, how they perceive it from your perspective. So first off, before we get into that, let's give a little bit of background about how you and I know each other. Where did we meet?
We met at City College. I was an art student, but you were a Jewish studies major, and I had to fulfill my language requirement. And so we ended up in Hebrew language classes together, and that's how we met each other.
It's awesome. And it's so fun because it was such a core group. And it was so many different kinds of people all learning Hebrew.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's how we know each other. And it's been over 5 years. Did you know that?
I can't believe it. I just can't effing believe it. I almost cursed, but
No, that's okay. And this is a podcast. So if you feel the need to use an expletive here or there, I do it routinely.
Do it a lot. So
yes.
Maybe you can just bleep it out.
No bleeps. There are no bleeps on this show. All right. So we're going to get right into the meat of it. And so give us a little bit of a background about who you are and, your history, where your family comes from, all of that in one sentence. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just joking.
No,
just a recap version of your history, your family history, and who you are.
In New York? Okay. Well, my father was first generation here. His parents were from Germany. They left Germany during World War II. My mother was born in Mexico. Her parents were from Poland. So big Jewish background. They come from big Jewish families. I grew up in an Orthodox community. Technically, my family is modern Orthodox, and we were technically.
I love this. Technically.
Yeah. And I'll give you the caveat because my father was raised, both of my parents were raised modern Orthodox. I went to yeshiva. Me and all my siblings went to yeshiva. We grew up in Washington Heights. Our schools were in Teaneck, New Jersey. And my brothers went to Yeshiva University High School. So we grew up in a very Orthodox community. We were part of the community. But our family, in and of itself, we barely ever kept Shabbat. We didn't eat pork and things like that. We didn't eat lobster, but we didn't really keep kosher at home. Okay. So we sort of just lived in these two worlds. We were part of the community, but also sort of outsiders, or we felt outsiders to the community, just sort of living in different worlds,
Okay. So now that we've covered that, and that gives a good overview into my next question, which is what does, with your upbringing, with your background, being Jewish, what does Israel mean to you?
Well, growing up...
Loaded question.
Yeah, totally loaded question, because it also changes, right? As a kid, especially going to yeshiva, Israel is put on a pedestal, right? Israel is the homeland. It's where we all want to be eventually. We say growing up in elementary school, we used to say the American national anthem, but then we'd also say the Israeli national anthem. So it was we loved Israel. Israel was just as much our country as Jews that America was.
Okay.
Because we were Jewish and Israel belongs to all Jews. And so growing up, we were just Israel is beautiful. It's an amazing land, and it's we're kids, so we don't get all the details. We were just told that Israel is our land and this is where we belong. And it's a beautiful country. And that's basically the gist and the image that we get. Okay. Growing up as a kid, I traveled to Israel a couple of times. So I do have a couple of vague memories, and my mother has some family there. And so we would visit her family.
Where would you guys go?
Mostly in Jerusalem and Yerushalayim, and so at least those are the memories that I have. I remember a very vague memory of her uncle. He was a giant to me back then. Apparently, he was a really short guy. But I was a really tiny girl, so everyone was a giant to me.
Well, that's one of the things. What you touched on something that's really interesting. So one of the big revelations, and I actually spoke about it in the last episode with a friend of mine from Jerusalem, and that's how much of, as holy as the city is, it still feels like a playground, because there are, with these ancient walls and these ancient stones, but you see little kids running around with their backpacks and jumping over the walls, and the bikes with the streamers, and even at the Kotel, which is, you see kids playing hopscotch and stuff like that. Yeah. So you've experienced that.
The past and the present and all these different ways of living sort of combine.
That's cool. All right. So I've heard from you about your school and about how your school shaped a lot of your notions of Israel. What about in the home and with your parents and your siblings?
So, my father always loved Israel also. It's strange because the reason we weren't religious at home is because my father was not a religious person. My mother was religious. She would go to shul every Saturday. My father never went to shul, maybe on Yom Kippur, maybe on Pesach. We'd go for the big holidays and the things you could bring the kids to. My father was a big schmoozer, so he'd love to talk to people and say hello to people. But he was not into praying. He was not into the services or things like that. but he was like insistent on, you got to send your kids to yeshiva. You got to know that you're Jewish. You got to marry a Jewish person. Hit your history and your religion and your culture and your are like all really important parts about your identity. And so Israel played a big part of that for him. And he always loved Israel. And I think in the back of his mind, he always sort of played with the idea of moving to Israel. But he also played with the idea of moving to a lot of places. And so lots of things didn't pan out, but my father loved Israel. And my mother, she had lived in Israel for 2 years. She had gone, I think, between like college and her master's, or somewhere in there, she had spent 2 years studying in school. So that's where she learned to speak Hebrew fluently. Her brother was living in Israel, all her like nephews and her niece and their kids, like her brother and his whole family, and even her mother at some point was living in Israel. So to her, Israel, I think, was always a second home. She always loved visiting Israel. And unfortunately, like after like those 2 trips in childhood, after her mother passed away, and then we went to Israel that second time for her mother's funeral, it was like a long time before going back to visit Israel again. Just too many kids, a lot going on, and Israel was expensive to go to. So
it still is, yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't something, unfortunately, that we could do often, but for my parents, it was a second home, in your hearts. It's like a second home to a lot of Jews.
Okay.
So that's what it was talked about growing up in the home. And I don't think that I really started to form my own opinions about Israel really until I went on a birthright trip when I was 26.
So hold on, wait a second. I'm not challenging that notion at all, but you had already developed a notion of Israel.
Well,
through all of this stuff. Else. So that I guess I'm asking for a little bit of clarification on this. You had maybe a renewed or differentiated notion or an updated version?
Yeah. So like, I guess
that sounded so argumentative. I'm so sorry.
You know what? It's nothing new, Michael. No, I love these kind of conversations that we have. I think that they're important.
Thank you.
I think that you're absolutely right. I did carry these notions, right? But they were not conclusions that I had come to. They were everyone else's opinions.
Okay. All right.
Because growing up, like, that's how you learn anything, right? People tell you what to believe and you believe it until you start getting your own information. You start going out there and exploring the world. And then like you get different viewpoints. And then that's how you learn to take a step back and be like, wait, so this whole time growing up, I was told Israel was this thing, but other people think Israel is this thing. And this person sees Israel this way. And so I'm like, where's the truth, right? And then eventually you realize that everyone has their own truth. And
so can you hold on for a second? Back up to that and the differing opinions and the differing views. What are some of these views that some of these people have? Because that's actually one of the questions that I have outlined. Were these different thoughts coming from within your community, within your family? Was it from other Jews? Was it from non-Jews? And what were some of these differing opinions?
Yeah. Well, these different opinions, like they obviously didn't just come overnight. These are opinions that I'm still exposed to over time. And like how I feel about Israel is constantly forming. It's constantly changing in different ways. And so like over the course, I would say of like, I'm 34 today and I went on birthright at 26. And so
I thought you were 26.
No, you didn't. Shut up.
Well, you look amazing. So keep going.
And so I would say that, when I went to birthright, it was, I think, the first time experiencing it as an individual, even though you're part of this group and, it's very like, I don't know what the word is, but it's like very like manicured. I don't know, like what they show you and how they talk about it, right? It's all like, from a perspective, right? They're very much promoting Israel as a beautiful country, and it is a beautiful country, but they're sharing one perspective. But
so it's narrated. It's sort of narrated.
Yeah, it's sort of
to some degree. Yeah, scripted. That's the perfect word. Yeah.
Yes, totally. But at the same time, they answered questions, or you could ask questions and get answers from an Israeli perspective versus asking that same question and then, getting an answer to a question from an Israeli Jew versus an American Jew, sometimes you'll get different answers.
Yes.
Which is just like, the information we have here is different because we're growing up halfway across the world. We don't know everything, right? We don't know the whole truth that's happening there, right? You have to live through it. At the same time, even though things are scripted, even though they're trying, they want Jews to love Israel, they want Jews to come to Israel, which is understandable. At the same time, you still, like, I'm an adult, it's my first time being in Israel as an adult, seeing it with fresh eyes versus like, just what you're hearing about it in the news or hearing about it from friends, or, just versus being there as a child when you have no idea. You don't even know how to form opinions. You're just observing and just soaking everything in like a sponge, Okay. So it was my first time experiencing it as an adult. And
what were some of these questions that were being asked?
A lot of people were asking, I don't know that I specifically had questions, but a lot of people were asking about the way, at least these are the questions that I remember, about the way the Israeli army would handle certain things. And I guess they were comparing it to how like the American army per se would handle things, like why they would never leave any man behind, not even one man, or why they would release like 70 terrorists, just to get like one person in return. And they would say, well, because every life matters, you don't get to decide which life matters. And, even if we have to release 70 terrorists to get one person back, the Torah says that it's worth it because you don't get to decide which life matters more.
No, and so, definitely.
But it was also just interesting to hear it from Israelis themselves, because I think that, as you get older in America, you get the sense that you're being preached to a lot, and yes. People are trying to convince you why Israel is amazing. And then you go there and you hear from people who actually live there, who are living through some of the horrible things that you've heard about, but they still believe that Israel is amazing. They still are so in love with the land and the home. And to hear it from them, I think, is reassuring. And it also just validates, a lot of things that you heard growing up.
So I want to touch on something real quick, which is interesting. So I was having a discussion, and I can't remember who it was with. It might have been with you, but I can't remember who exactly it was with. And it was the differentiation between patriotism and nationalism, and how everything that's patriotic is now nationalist, and how I don't agree with that, because there are things in United States history that I just are abhorrent to me. So we have slavery, the entire legacy of slavery. We have the My Lai massacre during Vietnam, which was when a unit of American Army went and slaughtered an entire village. These are horrible things. These are horrible things that individuals are responsible for. But the country as a whole is made up of a rainbow of different people, a lot of which and a lot of whom are not responsible for that. So let's move it back over to Israel and let's look at, okay, so something bad happens in the West Bank. Is the person in Tel Aviv responsible for this? You know what I mean? Where in the chain of command in the IDF is an individual responsible for something that happens on the ground on the border of Gaza? What a lot of people don't know is that there are swift and severe repercussions for incidents in the military where people lose their commands. They get kicked out of the army for doing stupid stuff. Some people go to jail. So I think it's important to understand that loving Israel and thinking that Israel is great isn't a nationalistic type of thing. It's a patriotic thing. And I don't know if you agree with that, but that's just my take on it. And it's usually my response when people are slinging shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd have to know like how you see the difference between nationalistic and patriotic too.
So let's take the World Cup. The World Cup's a great example. So the World Cup, you have all these people, or the Olympics, which are going on right now. You have all these people going around and saying, the United States is great, or Japan is great, or China is great. And that's okay. And they should do that because they should love their country and they should think that their country is the greatest place in the world to live. But it's different to say, well, the United States is great, but it's only good for Americans, and Americans should be the only people who live here, and everyone else should leave. Okay? And Israel is great, but it's only good for Jews, and Jews are the only people who can live there. That's not the case. That's not the case in Israel. Jews are not the only people who can live there.
Right.
There are aspects to citizenship, but those are done from a protectionist perspective in light of, and it all goes back to Theodore Herzl. Not to go into this long, where we go around, where I segue away from what we're talking about, but it's recognizing the greatness in the place that you live and the people that you live with, and thinking that they're great, but not saying that those people over there are you know what I mean, are horrible, deplorable, and should not be.
Right.
So that there.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying that nationalistic is believing that a country belongs only to its people, but patriotic is loving its country, but not meaning that other people are excluded. Like patriotic is loving your country, but the country being separated from the people. And nationalistic is the people in the country are one and the same.
Sort of, but I think more from in terms of nationalistic, you get into some really weird type of, you were talking about, remove it. So let's say take what's going on in Turkey right now, and southeastern Turkey, and the who's the group that I'm referencing something and I can't even remember the name of the group. But there's an ethnic group that lives out there, and the Turkish army went in and just decimated them, destroyed them, because they are not Turkic. They are, and that to me is nationalistic. Okay. You know what I mean? Right. Israel's not kicking out its Arab citizens. Israel's not kicking out. It's not even kicking out its African and Filipino immigrants, right, who want to just work there. So
Israeli does not equal Jewish, right? Israel was created to be the land, a safe place for Jews to come. That doesn't mean that other people can't come.
Exactly. So,
all right. Live there and can't be equal citizens, right?
Yes. So I would like to step off of this topic. Go
back.
And go back.
About before. Yeah. So birthright. Birthright was the first chance for me to experience Israel with my own eyes, I guess you could say, or where I started to see, it was I went there because it's birthright. And I was at the end, I was 26 and everyone was just you should go, go take a trip. It's a free trip, go do. And so I didn't go there with any expectations. I didn't go there for any reason, really. I just went because I could. But it was it sort of got the wheels turning again. And it got me thinking again about a place that I hadn't thought about really. It was sort of these ideas just sit in the back of your mind, but I hadn't really thought about it critically ever or in a really long time. So it was sort of the beginning of starting to form opinions about it. And then over the years, you meet Jews that have differing opinions, or you discover that different Jews have different opinions about Israel. There's some who believe that we're not supposed to be in Israel right now, but then there are most who believe that we deserve it and that we should have it because Jews deserve a place to call home where they feel safe. But then you also have a lot of non-Jews who have different opinions, some who are pro-Israel, some who are not pro-Israel. And just, from the politics and from your Jewish friends, and then from going back to Israel and meeting Israelis, you just get exposed to all these different opinions. And so then you just try to be objective, and you just try to form your own opinion, which is ever changing, right? As politics in this time change.
And that's also the hardest part, is sitting back and being objective. Yeah. Because like you said, it always seems like someone is trying to impress something upon your mind, change your opinion.
That's life, right? People always want you to see things from their perspective. They always want you. Yeah.
And I get that. And so one of the things that I had some issue with when I first visited. It was actually, I think it was the second time I visited. So my first and second time visiting were Ulpan, going to Ben Gurion University. And I'm Sephardi, okay? So and for the most part, Sephardis don't have this differentiation between Orthodox, modern Orthodox, conservative,
Right.
Reform. And we have differentiations between our level of, the best way to describe it is adherence to faith, and that would be Mazorti, who are traditional, and Dati, who are religious, and then you have Haredi, who are really religious.
Yeah.
So, but that for Sephardim, the plural, is very fluid, and there's a lot of acceptance within the community for individuals who are fluid between these different levels, okay, of adherence and ritual and observance. So I was speaking to a woman, a really nice young woman, but she couldn't wrap her head around it. She kept asking, "But what kind of Jew are you?" I'm Sephardi. I get that, but is that Orthodox, or is that is that conservative? What is that? I don't get that. And we couldn't really come to an understanding, and she really wanted me to take my life and put it into the box definition that she had, and I couldn't do
She
that.
wanted you to say, are you Orthodox, or are you like she knew all these different like versions of Judaism, and she wanted you to be one of them, or she just wasn't understanding what Sephardi was?
She couldn't. Well, one, she didn't understand. I don't think she understood what Sephardi was, and two, to a lot of American Jews, and specifically religious American Jews, you have to fall within the rainbow of, because you can't be in two groups.
Yeah.
You cannot be in two groups at all, let alone all of us be, huh? What did you?
Fit into a box, don't you know?
And that is a very American Jewish experience, not an Israeli Jewish experience.
I think it's because the majority of Israelis, I could be totally wrong.
That's fine.
But I think the majority of Israelis.
Your experiences. It's your experiences. So that's okay.
Yeah. And so I think that there's like a huge Sephardi community in Israel, like much bigger than there is in America. And I think, the biggest population of Jews in America
50%.
Yeah.
50% is Sephardi or Mizrahi. So,
okay.
Which is Middle Eastern Jews or Spanish Jews.
Or Southern, or it's like Middle Eastern or Southern Europe, right? Like it could be like French or like Spanish or Portuguese.
I'm trying to make it digestible and easy for people to understand.
Okay.
So.
Whereas I'm Ashkenazi, right? And so I'm a mix, but ultimately Ashkenazi or Sephardi is determined by your father. And so my mother was Ashkenazi. My father was Ashkenazi. He was a German Jew, which is a little different actually than other Ashkenazi. It's called Yeki. And so we were raised as Yeki, Ashkenazi. And so that's like how I was raised. And apparently so the biggest population in America of Jews exists in New York. And when the Jewish population in New York, I think at the beginning was mostly German. And so growing up, I was surrounded, all I knew were like the community it was all like German Jews. And if there was someone else I didn't know, like there were 3 German like synagogues in our neighborhood. Like that's what like Washington Heights was, that's what New York was. And I think like much of New York is Ashkenazi. I don't know the percentage, but that could explain like why, American Jews see it that way, is because that's the world that they grew up in.
I'm sure. Yeah. All right. So we see that so that's one thing that is a big difference between American Jews and Israeli Jews. And that fluidity probably allows them to see things a lot less rigidly as you'll notice when you're in Israel, the concepts of being on time just don't exist. But a lot of that can be traumatic to American Jews. Is that something that any of your friends or family members experienced when they were there? Culture shock, you know what I mean? Like Jewish culture shock. I'm going to the land. Whoa, wait a minute. This is not the land of the Jews that I expected.
No, I don't think it was like really like shocking. I think we knew it was going to be a different place. Like it's its own country, right? It's its own like world, and it's in a whole nother part of the world. It's in the Middle East. So it's like very Middle Eastern. The food is Middle Eastern. You know, it's like sort of like this combination between the Middle East and Europe, right? It's like a really cool combination of both, I think. And it's also, there's like so many different types of Jews, right? You have some that like are in like wear the black hats and like the black coats and like suits. And then there's some that are super casual. And that's not really different from like what you see growing up, especially in New York, because there's so many different kinds of Jews.
Someone made a comment that, what the heck was the comment? It was on my first, or maybe it was on my second Ulpan, but they were like, wait a minute, people in kippas and shorts, I thought only kids did that. So,
Wow.
no, but people just dressing so relaxed, yet being religious, that's not something that they had been accustomed to seeing.
Okay. Well, I think that, you know, and maybe like when I was younger, it would have been like more shocking, but like, again, like I don't remember a lot of it when I was younger. So I don't remember if there was like a culture shock. Sure there was, you know, having, you know, lived in one place and then suddenly going somewhere else, right? It's very shocking. But like living in New York, there's so many different types of Jews. We come in all shapes and sizes and different forms, and, you know, people dress in all different ways. So Israel wasn't that shocking for me.
Coming from a place that was so Jewishly dense, coming to another place that's Jewishly dense, and also coming from the more Orthodox side, there probably was a comfort level, correct?
Yes, totally. If anything, like I felt more comfortable, you know, even growing up in New York, where it's very normal to be Jewish. You still sort of feel like an outsider, you know, because Jews, even in America and even New York, are talked about like, you know, a lot of the Jews that I know consider themselves to be white, but Jews are still in some ways talked about as if they're different. They're their own people, and we are. And so you still sort of, even if it's in the back of your mind, feel that. At least I always did for a long time. And so you go to Israel and that disappears, because you're just like, well, almost everyone here is Jewish. And so I don't have to think about that anymore. We're different types of Jew, but we're all Jewish. And so I don't have to feel like singled out anymore.
So that's good. And that is what made it so wonderful for me when I visited, because, and it's interesting because I want to get your perspective on this. So being Jewish and going to City College of New York, which it was traditionally, that's where we know each other from, which was traditionally the Jewish Harvard. As a Jew at City College, I felt like an outsider, like specifically, and I was in the Jewish Studies program. Yeah. And
you were the only Jew in the Jewish Studies program.
I was pretty much the only Jew in the Jewish Studies program. So how, you said that your views on Israel developed over time, that your views not changed, but maybe evolved over time. What were the catalysts that changed your mind, and what, in your opinion, just your opinion, were some of the reasons why people who may have been Jewish had differing opinions than yours, to the extreme, to the just, oh, I think this should be a little different. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't know that I can pinpoint a single catalyst or that I can think of a single moment that like altered, at least like nothing comes to my mind. I think that over time, like I do with a lot of things, you just, like for instance, my sister has been dating an Israeli for many years. And so when things would happen in Israel or news was shared about Israel and America, she'd then come and give us the Israeli perspective, or at least his perspective, and like the Israeli perspective that he shared with her. Okay. And so like you sort of for the first time are getting information from both sides, so to speak. And so, just I think over the years, just slowly just getting and absorbing different viewpoints. So I don't know that I could pinpoint like a specific catalyst or a specific moment that's just like, no, now I see Israel differently. Maybe there was, I don't know.
I mean, were your viewpoints wildly different from when you had grown up, or were they altered a little bit, or were you suddenly pro? Now
if we talk about today, I think absolutely like how I see Israel is different. I think, but because I think about it on a much more complex level than I ever did before, right? And I think that like, my opinions about Israel and my feelings about Israel are like very conflicted often. So that's definitely, it's more complex than like it was growing up or even as an adult. Yeah.
What would be one of the, I know you said you can't think of any one thing, but if you could, what is one thing that that's evolved in your opinion on your support or lack of support for Israel?
So, I mean, it's like such a complex issue, right? And there's like so much history, and it's like what America struggles with, like, what do we do with our Native people? How do we make it right? And like, what kind of rights do Native American people have? And what kind of rights do other Americans have? America was conquered hundreds of years ago. So what responsibility do us as people have? And like, who has the right to the land? If you go on a really basic level, my personal opinion is, and a lot of Jews will disagree because it says different in the Torah, but my personal opinion is that land doesn't belong to anyone. And people just come along and they just put a flag down and I'm like, this is mine now. It's not yours. And I get to say who comes in here, right? And so I disagree on a really basic level. I disagree with that. And I think it's all just one world and it all just belongs to everyone.
But and that's a fundamental. So you're fundamental.
But on a basic level, if you like take care of your land and if you're just like, well, I've taken care of this place and it's like I've cared for it and you want to come along and just profit off of it, or you just want to live off of it now, right? Then it starts to get complicated. And this is why like all like the Jewish laws and all this stuff were created about land, right? If I tend to this land and I grow things and I raise my cattle on it and then you come along and live on it, do you have a right to it now, right? All these things come into play so it's obviously way more complicated than that like fundamental like hippie belief I have, right? But
go on.
So on a fundamental level, that's what I believe. But we are where we are, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't go backwards. You can't change the past. And there are, as much as I would like us all to see things the same way and for us all to just get along and to just love each other and to just take care of each other, that's not happening tomorrow. So how do we figure out a solution that can at least take us in the right direction, can at least take us in a step forward, where you have different people functioning together. And so this is what plays in my mind all the time. And so sometimes I'm just like, surely Israel did some things wrong along the way. And surely Palestinians have done some things wrong. You can't say the fault is totally false on one side. Like any relationship, it's never just on one side. Does Israel, so I'm just running through the questions that like run through my mind. Like, do Jews really deserve to have Israel? Do they deserve to have a land of their own? Absolutely. Because any people who've been like so segregated and and isolated and like massacred like Jews have, they should surely have a place where they can call home, that they can make it their own, where they can protect themselves.
Well, can I interrupt for just one sec? Because I think there's a component to what you just said, which is incredibly important and is often overlooked and missed. And you said right on the head, they deserve a place. We deserve a home, and all of that, and that is great. But then, I think the thing that's forgotten is the amount of work that went into developing that home, the amount of work that went. And we talk about the wars that were fought, okay?
Yeah.
But all right, take a look at New York, Boston, Philadelphia. Okay, and we say, well, this is our home in the United States because we fought against the British, and okay, all right, but that's part one. That's step one.
Right.
What about all the Jews, Germans, Irish who came and built New York, Philadelphia, and Boston? And the same thing goes for Israel, I think. Yes, we won in this the War for Independence, the 6-Day War, and the Yom Kippur War. But what about all of the strong backs, men and women? I mean, strong women who
that
went and built. Yeah. And nothing is ever said about that. Nothing is ever said about that work that goes into it. But
I mean, I've definitely like heard this in like conversations before, that like Israel developed the country, like its infrastructure, its irrigation system. It took it to a level that the Palestinians never did. And yeah, absolutely. Like Israel is what it is today because the Israelis brought it to that level, right? If you go back in time, you know, Jews absolutely needed a land. The problem is like the entire world was already claimed by people. So what do you give to Jews, right? And so it's like, was the right decision made? I don't know. Like, I can't go back in time and make that decision. That's like, I don't know. I don't know if the right decision was made, but it's what was made. And it is what it is today. And I think that the situation falls, like, my heart breaks when things like what recently happened, and like you have like an 11-day war and like people are killed, and my heart breaks. And you want to take a side and you want to be angry because you want to make sense of it, and you want someone to blame for all the death and senselessness. And I think, you know, the conclusion, at least that I came to from the most recent thing, is that most of the people who live there just want peace. They just want to live their lives. They just want happiness. They don't want to fight. They don't want to argue. And if they have to compromise, the majority are willing to do it. And it's just the leaders in the country that betray their people and that are just looking out for themselves, right? And it's really unfortunate, but it's what's happening throughout the world, not just in Israel, not just in the Middle East, right?
I think that's actually the biggest issue, is we will sit and we will say an entire group did something, and we won't hold accountable the individuals who did it. We won't hold accountable the guy who survived, who's the head of Hamas. He's the one responsible. Not to me. This is my personal opinion. He's responsible, and the people who support him. The average person in Gaza who's told at the end of a barrel to get up to the border and start yelling at the IDF, they don't want to die, so they say okay. They don't want their kids to die, so they say okay.
Or they're brainwashed, it's a very strong word, or they're just manipulated into believing something, into believing that if you do this, somehow your life will be better. Somehow your existence will mean something, your family's existence. Somehow this is going to help. And they're made to genuinely believe that what they're doing is for the better.
Well, this rolls into what I wanted to ask you about in the some of the last questions of this interview, and that is the relationship between anti-Semitism and Israel, because Israel is a Jewish state, and one of the things that you brought up was the war with Gaza. And I was speaking to a friend of mine, and I said, there's one thing that can happen that would stop this, that would absolutely stop all of this. And I don't know if you'll agree with me, and if you don't, that's fine. But if Egypt took a more proactive role in the development of Gaza, I think that Gaza would not become such a problem for the state of Israel. And it pays more for Gaza to be an imprisoned state.
How so?
In terms of nonprofits and NGOs that collect money on behalf of the Palestinian people who are trapped in Gaza, who, what a lot of people don't know is that there are Palestinian refugee camps in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. I don't know if it's still in Lebanon, and there's one in Egypt, and they're not allowed to leave. They're not allowed to be citizens of the country that the refugee camp is in, and all of these countries accept money on behalf of the Palestinians. So there's a lot of money to be made in keeping the Palestinians stateless or imprisoned, so to speak. Yeah. And I think if Egypt did a lot more, then this past war could have been avoided. But one of the byproducts of that is that in order to keep everyone against Israel, they don't use anti-Israel, they use anti-Semitic tropes and slogans, and we need to wipe the Jews off the map. So what's your opinion on this? How does this make you feel being Jewish? And how does this, your heart breaks for everyone, but then you find out that your heart is breaking for someone who would spit in your face. How does that make you feel?
Well, to go back to like your Egyptian comment first, I think if like the entire Middle East just, it's like a very complicated issue, but the Western world has like gone in and messed with like the Middle East, and the Middle East is suffering a lot, all of its countries. And I think that all of its countries need a lot of help and need a lot of direction and guidance. And I think the Western world is just sort of like helping, but really looking out for itself. And I think that the entire Middle East is suffering because of it. And I think if the Middle East was developed and brought to the state that the Western world is in, it would be an entirely different place. And I think that there's so much war because people are suffering and because people don't have the quality of life that they're supposed to have, like every human being. Like it's happening all over the world, right? And the Western world just, we don't ignore it, but
we do. We totally ignore it.
We're aware of it. And we're aware of it. And then we go on with our lives. Like, oh, that's so sad. Oh, what do you want to eat for lunch today? Yeah. So yes. I think that the Middle East as a whole, like the world should come together and help a part of the world like that's suffering, right? Like we're all people in it together. In terms of like this past experience and like instead of anti-Israel, it becomes anti-Semitic. And then like, how do I feel about that personally? I don't like that, right? And I think that part of that comes from like the fear that's pumped into a society when things like this are happening. Most people are scared and they don't know how to digest something like this, and fear and anger is just an easy conduit to do with all of these like scary emotions, right? And it's something that's happened time and time again for Jews, for Blacks, for all minorities, right? You use fear as an outlet, but it's not a solution. It's part of the problem. You just like continue to prolong like the hurt and the pain and the hatred that is like, it's like a vicious cycle, right?
Yes.
So, like not all Jews are Israeli and not all Israeli are Jews. And I think that people need to separate need to separate it. It sort of goes back to like your thing about nationalistic and patriotic, right? Need to separate people from its country. And like what America, like when Trump was president here, what Trump did not represent all Americans. And that was very known. So why does what Israel's leaders do represent all of its people and represent only part of its people, actually only a certain part or a certain kind of its people, right? And how does that then connect back to Jews all around the world just because some Israelis are Jews, right?
Well, no, that's yeah.
Yeah, and then how do I feel about, my heart breaking, as you say, for people who would spit in my face?
Actually, I was being nice about that.
Yeah, I think that when things were happening in Israel this past time around, I was genuinely scared for the first time in my life to be a Jew. Like, I was like genuinely scared. And I was just like, fuck, like, I know that like I can get away with looking like a lot of things, but some of my brothers look Jewish. And so if someone is just having a shitty day and he's just looking for some outlet and someone's not in his right mind, he can go beat the fuck up out of my brother or he can kill him. And it's just like, I was genuinely scared. But my heart still breaks for them because I know that they don't understand. They know not what they do. And so that's my objective thing. You can't become the people that like you disagree with. You can't become like them, and you have to stay above it all. You have to stay separate from it all. Otherwise, we all just get so caught up in the whirlwind that none of us are ever going to see clearly. And there's never going to be a solution because he starts to hate me and then I hate him because he hates me, and then the anger and then the fear. And then it's just like, so in some level, you have to be able to separate yourself from it. And even the people that scare you and even the people that threaten you, you have to be like, I understand like where you're coming from, and I'm sorry that you see it that way. And I hope one day you see it different, and all I can do is, and that's it on a basic level. And all you can do is move forward and do the best that you can and try to make things better and hope that people give you a chance to do that,
All right. Okay, cool. Very cool. So how do you feel after this roller coaster ride?
I feel great. I love you.
We have covered so much, and we have covered so much more than I had even. We went from nationalism to anti-Semitism to patriotism to the World Cup to everywhere. Yeah. Charlotte, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. How do you feel?
Good. How do you feel?
I feel amazing. I'm always surprised by. I write these questions and I craft these questions and I say, I wonder where this is going to go. I wonder where this is going to go. And this time has been perfect. You are a star. Thank you so much. All right, that's it for this episode. Charlotte, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome.
And all right, that's it. Toda rabah. Lihyot yalla bye.
אין אחד שבא אליה לבקש את ידה ובתסוגר עליה בליבה חתום נעול סגור שבור לחישה בלילה והיא איננה גם שרחוקה היא ממני זיכרונה עולה שוב בליבי הלילה איך אותה רציתי כל חיי ידי בידה ולאור ירח עוד יאיר לי כוכב בידה אחזתי, היא כמו חלום שלא נגמר רק זאת שאלתי, שליבי נתתי הושעתי לפרח הנשאר